So you think you like books? Bit of a cheeky reader, are ya? Me? I'm just a bit of a literary worm. Well, that's cute. But this video isn't for you. This video is for the people who are so into books, they don't only want to read books. They want to read books about books. They want to read books about other people reading books. They want to read books only set in places where there are a lot of books. They want to read books about people who make books, people who hate books, people who tell stories about people in books, who are writing books about people who they'd read about in books. That's it. That's what I'm offering you today. You don't have to come. It's a weird journey, I'll admit. Hello and welcome back to my channel. My name's Lena. I make videos about books on top of other things, mainly other things that I've learned about from books. So you could say I'm kind of into it. And one of the things I love most when it comes to choosing or finding books that I love is books that are for people who love thinking about the concept of books. Now in this video I'm covering a wide variety of different ways books can slot into that category. But I wrote my dissertation on metafiction. We love a book within a book trope, and I wanted to tell you about some of my favourites today. Is that okay? Good. These are my top 10, but I would love if you popped into the comments and told me yours, because my favourites are forever evolving and I'm always up for finding out about new books. Book squared. Coming in first is The Reader on the 627. This is one of my favourite freaking books ever. It's translated from French and it's about a man who works in a pulping factory. What's a pulping factory, you ask? Well, it's a thing in the book industry that when I worked in it and I found out it was a thing, it made me want to leave. Books are expensive to make, but they're also expensive to store. And when you are publishing a book and you're not sure how many copies it's going to sell, per copy it's cheaper to print more books, which is what they do. Now, if those books don't sell very fast and they're actually costing more to keep in a warehouse than they would potentially be to sell in the future, they put them in the mouths of a pulping machine, which in theory turns them back into paper, but it's actually really hard to recycle books. But anyway, they break down books so they are books no more, often when they have never been read. Unread books pummeled into nothing. Anyway, this is about a man who works in a pulping factory, and he, against orders, will save random pages from the books that are being pulped and get on his morning commute train the next day and read them aloud to the commuters. It's a small book, but lots of things happen to him on his way to self-actualization and working his way out of this job that he hates, and the only way he can rectify it is to read these books aloud on trains. But one of the things that I most remember is that one of his friends at the pulping factory actually gets stuck in the machine and one of his legs gets pulped. The pulp gets recycled into new pages of new books. So they go and find out which book it was recycled into, and him and his friend try and collect all of the books that potentially have bits of his leg in them so he can get his leg back. I think that sets the tone of the book perfectly, if I'm honest, and it's really genuinely one of my favourites. This one is The Wife by Meg Wolitzer. Please ignore the movie cover, although while movie covers are a contentious issue in the book loving world, who doesn't want to look at Glenn Close all day? This is a short book about a woman who is travelling on a plane with her husband, and while they are in the air, she tells him she wants a divorce. They're on the way for him to collect the most prestigious literary prize, kind of like the Nobel Prize, ever for his contributions to literature and writing. He's one of the most famous authors in the world, but he has a massive secret, and it's the reason that she's divorcing him. I am not going to ruin this book for you. Don't even try and guess what the resolution is. But if that sounds interesting to you, you should pick it up, because the mechanisms of writing, sexism, and the idea of writing to be a writer and to have prestige rather than any more noble cause is what's discussed in this, and it's so good. Meg Wolitzer, by the way, I know she is quite famous, but I still think that she's underrated for what she can actually do. I haven't read this book in a long time, but I remember loving it and I've tabbed it up quite a lot. This is another French translation by Sophie Divry, The Library of Unrequited Love. This follows a one-way conversation a librarian is having with a reader that has been accidentally locked in the library overnight and can't get out, and instead of letting them out, she monologues at them about her whole life, what she's thinking as a librarian. She goes over her belief in what the arts should be, how ungrateful the public are to to her, how she doesn't like her colleagues apart from this one guy that she's really in love with, her petty thoughts on the Dewey Decimal System, and it's just a really unreliable narrator, fun look into what it is like to be a librarian and the idea of working in a place where you care about something and nobody else does. Oh my god, this is another translation. I didn't mean for this to happen, but apparently other people are writing great books about books not in English. This is Bambert's book of missing stories by Reinhardt Jung, and it's translated from German, and it is about a guy called Bambert who lives at the top of a building and barely comes out. He doesn't really interact with the world very much, but what he does like doing is writing short stories. So one day he takes all of his short stories, he cuts out the names and the places and the specifics of each story carefully out of paper, and then he puts them in tiny little nightlight balloons and sends them out into the sky. So this is his story of why he did that, but also it includes every story that he's written, and he encourages that if somebody finds the stories that he's put in the hot air balloons, they fill it in with their own location wherever the story ended up and their own names. So it's a cool meta story about somebody who's writing stories and sharing them, and I think it's for children, but I honestly don't care. It's so good. This is one I read last year and didn't have that much time to chat about online, so I just wanted to include it. This is The Assembly of the Severed Head by Hugh Lupton. It is set in 13th century Wales, which I guarantee you have never read a book set there before. It's about a monastery of monks who keep finding severed heads turning up on the beach, and they're not really sure why until they realise that because of the feud of the English and the Welsh have had to hide all of their poets and the people who know all the ancient Welsh stories together in this one location, so the English army can't find them because they know that if you kill a nation's poets, you kill their spirit. And it turns out they did find the poets, and they killed almost all of them and cut off their heads, chucked them in the sea, apart from one poet that they find who is just about still alive. They take him in and, reluctantly on some of the monks' part, help him record the last stories of Wales that he has inside his brain that nobody else knows, going against their vow to only use their talents for writing to write down sacred texts only. They sit with him and he tells the stories of Wales, the ones that include very unholy things as well as more noble pursuits. So I'd say at least 50% of this book is those tales and 50% is the stories of the people who make that possible, and it's very sweet. There is a love story in it, and I thought it was very unusual and very, very well done. Read more books about Wales. It's the thing I should do. The next one is 84 Charing Cross Road. Ooh, if you haven't read this book, you're in for a freaking treat. It's written in letter form, it's really short, it's beautiful in audiobook, but very nice to read in physical as well. It's about an author who lives in New York and has always wanted to go to London. It's set during the war, and she struggles to find the books that she wants to read that informs her writing. So she writes to this antiquarian bookshop on Charing Cross Road in London and asks them to source the books for her. She strikes up a reluctant and grumpy friendship with the main bookseller there in their letters, and although they're like oceans away in an age where you can't just spontaneously go and visit somebody or Zoom them or Skype them, they have this really beautiful pen friend connection, all based on literature and books and the pursuit of a good book physically and emotionally. So if you haven't read any books in this video, I think this is the one to start with. The Reading List by Sara, Nisha Adams. Oh, this book is about a widower called Mukesh who has just lost his wife, and he's very sad about it, and he's trying to connect with his granddaughter Priya, and he's not doing a very good job of it. He's never read before, but his wife was really, really into reading, and he finds sanctuary at the library. At the library, you'll find the other main character, Alicia, who is struggling at her job in the library and finds a reading list in the back of one of the books. He comes in asking for help. She gives him the list. They start to both read the books and include other people in it too. It's a book about intergenerational platonic friendship, about grief, about loss, and it's set in a library. What is not to like? Mr. Penumbra's 24-hour bookstore came out in maybe 2012, which is probably when I read it, so I don't have huge amounts of detailed memories about it, but I do remember it being really fun. It's about a guy who is like a tech bro, I think. Yeah, he's an unemployed software developer who ends up getting a job in a 24-hour bookshop and uncovers this secret society that he had no idea existed, and it's like very 2010s tech inspired meets mysterious underworld. Very atmospheric from what I can remember. But I have warm feelings, you know, then that's all that matters. The next one is Tilly and the Bookwanderers, which is the first book in the Pages & Co series by Anna James. Loved this, absolute rollicking good time. It's kind of middle grade children's book, but I think anyone could read it, and it's about a girl and her best friend whose grandparents ran a bookshop, and it's a very cozy, lovely vibe at the beginning, and you realise that she occasionally starts bumping into characters from books, like Alice from Alice in Wonderland stuff, when she's in the bookshop, and it's all very sweet. And then things take a turn I was not expecting, about the secret world of underground libraries and what a character is or isn't. It's very meta, it's very clever, and I think what I really liked about this book, and I'd love to read the rest of the series, is that it's complex enough to keep children in their seats. It knows how clever children are, and it gives them like the imagination food that isn't just like, let me tell you a story about a girl who goes to a beach, or let me tell you a story about a man who lives in a tree. This is like, let me let you into this incredibly complex world that you will be thinking about for days. Loved it. And then finally, the last one on the list has to be The Book Thief. I freaking love that book. I've read it like 3 times. I think it's incredible. I don't really want to tell you the whole story right now because I'm aware of how famous that book is, but safe to say it is a book set in Nazi Germany, narrated by the character Death. Death is the narrator. It's so incredibly good, so is the film. I know that a lot of you probably know a lot about it already, but I just wanted to remind you there's a thing, it exists, and if you haven't, you should. Honourable mentions include The Bookshop by Penelope Fitzgerald, which was a very subpar book, but a very incredible film, and it's very rare that you'll hear me say that, but it is, and I love that freaking film, so this is just basically an excuse for me to say, watch the film instead. The Eyre Affair by Jasper Fforde, which is a meta romp into different books. It's very silly, but it's very good. First Person by Richard Flanagan, which I had to read in a rush because I was interviewing the author, so I don't remember everything about it, but I remember how well it was written, so I wanted to put it on the honourable mentions list because it's about the idea of ghostwriting and somebody ghostwriting somebody else's life, and it's one on my to reread list just because I had to read it in such a rush and I'd like to take it slower. And then finally, Dear Reader by Paul Fournel, again translated from French, which is a book that I read when I first got into the book industry and remember loving, but don't remember enough about it to be like, yeah, read it. But I remember that it was about an old publisher who was really struggling with the concept of e-readers and Kindles coming in, and him trying to understand it through the lens of the younger people working in his publishing house, which is very relevant to my life at the time. So that's one on my to reread list as well. I wanted to include a quick TBR list in this list as well. Books that I've heard really great things about and I cannot wait to read. Fahrenheit 451 by Ray Bradbury, who I've recently realised is an amazing writer. I read this short story collection from Everyman, which I really, really loved, and it had some short stories and excerpts from Ray Bradbury, and I was like, I think I've been sleeping on this man. That book should also be on the list. It's not a novel. I kind of just wanted to feature fiction here, but it is like collections of short stories and fiction, so I guess it belongs in this video too. It's a very good little before bed read. I'll leave a link to where I've talked about that book below. The Shadow of the Wind, which I know is a massive classic and is very meta, and I should read it. The Other Black Girl, which is a thriller set in a publishing house, I'd really, really like to read. Reading Lolita in Tehran, which I've talked about how I would like to read it before. I'm gonna read it by the end of this year, I swear. My Salinger Year, which is all about a woman working in San Francisco in the publishing industry. Haunted, which is about a group of writers, I believe, who all want to write horror stories and go on a retreat together. So it's kind of the stories that they write and also how they, in a really fucked up way, were linked to their own lives, I think. It sounds good though. If I'm brave enough to read it, also looks terrifying. And then finally The Sentence, which was longlisted for the Women's Prize last year, and I read it and I didn't really get on with that much, so I DNF'd it. But so many of you messaged me telling me that I shouldn't have DNF'd it and it is really good and I should continue with it. And I remember that I was quite grumpy at the time that I was reading it, just in general about life, so it probably wasn't the best mindset. So anyway, I would like to reread that. That's all I had to say on that. Calm down, Lena. Thank you so much for watching this incredibly self-indulgent video, but if you are one of the people who are interested, thank you for watching. If you like this video, I reckon you'd like one of these videos. This video was made possible by the Gumption Club, who tip me per video to make sure these videos keep happening and also make sure that I can make silly videos like this and not worry about the algorithm. Thank you to them. Frog Snog out.